What would you do if you discovered that the most powerful being in the galaxy was dying because of something as simple as water? When 12-year-old Maya Chen stumbled upon a creature older than civilizations, she had no idea that her act of kindness would reshape the destiny of every living species in the universe. This is not just a story about an alien and a human child. This is about the moment when humanity proved that sometimes the smallest gestures can move mountains, bend time, and turn the tide of an intergalactic war that had raged for millennia. In a cosmos where ancient beings wielded power beyond imagination, where star-spanning empires crumbled like dust, and where the very fabric of reality could be torn asunder, one girl with a water bottle would become the catalyst for the greatest alliance the universe had ever seen. But, first, she had to choose between walking away or stepping into a legend. The morning sun cast long shadows across the hiking trail as Maya Chen adjusted her backpack straps and checked her water bottle for the third time. At 12 years old, she had convinced her parents to let her explore the outer edges of the nature preserve alone, promising to stay on marked trails and return before sunset. What she hadn't told them was that she planned to venture just a little bit beyond the boundaries, where the old geological surveys had marked strange mineral deposits that made her science teacher's eyes light up with curiosity. Maya had always been different from other kids her age. While her classmates spent their weekends playing video games or hanging out at the mall, she found herself drawn to the mysteries hidden in rocks, the stories told by fossilized remains, and the whispered secrets of places where few humans had ever walked. Her bedroom walls were covered with maps of unexplored territories, photographs of unusual rock formations, and newspaper clippings about archaeological discoveries. Her parents, both practical engineers, had learned to support their daughter's unusual interests, even if they didn't always understand them. The trail grew narrower as Maya ventured deeper into the preserve. Ancient pine trees towered overhead, their branches creating a cathedral-like canopy that filtered the sunlight into dancing patterns on the forest floor. The air smelled of pine needles, moss, and something else, something she couldn't quite identify. It was metallic, almost electric, like the air before a thunderstorm but without the humidity. As she rounded a bend in the trail, Maya noticed something that made her stop in her tracks. The trees ahead looked different, wrong somehow. Their trunks were twisted in unnatural spirals, and their needles had an odd blue-green tinge that she had never seen before. Even more strange was the complete absence of sound. No bird calls, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush, not even the whisper of wind through the branches. The forest had become eerily silent. Maya's scientific curiosity overrode her growing sense of unease. She pulled out her notebook and began sketching the unusual trees, noting their twisted growth patterns and the strange coloration of their foliage. As she drew, she noticed that her pencil seemed to vibrate slightly in her hand, as if responding to some invisible energy in the air. The sensation was not unpleasant, just unusual, like the feeling of standing too close to a powerful speaker. Following a barely visible game trail that wound between the twisted trees, Maya climbed steadily upward. The strange metallic scent in the air grew stronger with each step, and she began to notice other oddities. Rocks along the path bore unusual crystalline formations that sparkled with an inner light. Some of the crystals were warm to the touch, while others felt ice-cold. Her digital camera, which had been working perfectly all morning, began producing images with strange color distortions and unexplained light patterns. After climbing for nearly an hour, Maya crested a small ridge and gasped at the sight before her. In the center of a circular clearing lay what could only be described as a dragon, though unlike any dragon from the fairy tales she had read as a child. This creature was easily the size of a school bus, with scales that shifted color like oil on water, reflecting deep purples, blues, and greens that seemed to pulse with their own inner radiance. Its wings, folded against its massive body, appeared to be made of some translucent material that caught and refracted light in impossible ways. But it was the creature's eyes that truly captivated Maya. They were ancient beyond measure, holding depths that spoke of eons of existence, of witnessing the birth and death of stars, of secrets that spanned the cosmos. Yet in those ancient eyes, Maya saw something that struck her to her core: pain, exhaustion, and a profound sadness that seemed to encompass the suffering of entire worlds. The dragon's breathing was labored, each rise and fall of its massive chest accompanied by a sound like wind through distant canyons. Its scales, which should have gleamed with health and power, appeared dull and lifeless in places, as if the very essence of the creature was slowly fading away. Around the clearing, the twisted trees leaned inward, as if drawn by some invisible force emanating from the dying being at their center. Maya stood at the edge of the clearing for several minutes, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. Every rational part of her brain insisted that dragons were mythological creatures, products of human imagination and folklore. Yet here was evidence to the contrary, breathing and suffering before her very eyes. The scientist in her wanted to document everything, to take photographs and measurements, to understand the impossible. The human in her simply wanted to help. As she stood there, torn between wonder and disbelief, the dragon's great head turned toward her with painful slowness. Those ancient eyes fixed upon her small form, and Maya felt a presence touch her mind, not invasive or frightening, but gentle, like the whisper of a summer breeze. The contact lasted only a moment, but, in that brief connection, Maya understood several things with startling clarity. The creature was indeed dying, not from any wound or disease, but from a lack of something essential to its existence. It had traveled vast distances across space and time to reach this place, drawn by some cosmic necessity that Maya could not fully comprehend. Most importantly, it posed no threat to her or to anyone else. It was, despite its awesome size and obvious power, a being in desperate need of help. The dragon's massive head settled back onto the ground with a sound like a landslide, and its eyes closed as if the effort of acknowledging her presence had drained what little strength it had remaining. Maya noticed then, what she had missed in her initial shock at seeing the creature: the ground around the dragon was cracked and dry, despite the fact that the rest of the forest was lush and green. The very earth seemed to be withering away from the creature, as if its presence was somehow drawing the life from everything around it. Understanding dawned on Maya with the force of a physical blow. The dragon was not just dying, it was dying of thirst. But this was no ordinary thirst. The creature needed something more than water, though water might be a crucial component. It needed life force, vitality, the very essence that animated living things. The twisted trees, the crystalline formations, the strange energy in the air, all were symptoms of the dragon's desperate attempt to find sustenance in an environment that could not provide what it truly needed. Maya's hand moved unconsciously to the water bottle at her hip. The rational part of her mind immediately dismissed the idea as ridiculous. What could one bottle of ordinary water do for a creature of such immense size and obvious power? Yet something deeper than logic, some instinct that connected her to the suffering being before her, whispered that she was wrong to dismiss the gesture as meaningless. The dragon's breathing grew more labored, and Maya noticed that the strange energy in the air was fluctuating, growing weaker with each passing moment. The crystalline formations on the nearby rocks were losing their inner light, and the twisted trees were beginning to straighten, as if whatever force had shaped them was losing its grip on reality. Maya realized with growing alarm that she was witnessing the final moments of a being whose death would leave a void in the cosmos that she could not begin to imagine. Decision crystallized in her mind with sudden clarity. Whether her actions would make any difference or not, she could not simply stand by and watch a conscious being die without at least trying to help. Maya stepped into the clearing, her feet crunching softly on the dry, cracked earth. The sound seemed unnaturally loud in the oppressive silence, and she half expected the dragon to raise its head again, but the creature remained motionless save for its labored breathing. As she approached the massive form, Maya became increasingly aware of the sheer scale of the being before her. Each of the dragon's scales was larger than her hand, and its claws, partially buried in the dry earth, were longer than her forearms. The creature's presence filled the clearing with an almost tangible weight, a sense of vast age and accumulated wisdom that made Maya feel like an ant in the presence of a mountain. Yet as overwhelming as the dragon's physical presence was, Maya found herself drawn not to its power but to its vulnerability. This ancient being, capable of reshaping reality with its very existence, was as helpless in its current state as any injured animal she might find on the trail. The realization gave her courage to continue forward, even as every instinct screamed at her to maintain a safe distance from something so far beyond human understanding. When Maya reached a point roughly halfway between the clearing's edge and the dragon's massive head, she stopped and unscrewed the cap of her water bottle. The simple plastic container, filled with ordinary tap water from her kitchen sink, seemed laughably inadequate for the task she was contemplating. Yet it was all she had to offer, and something deep within her insisted that the gesture itself might be more important than the practical effect of the water. The dragon's eyes opened as she approached, those ancient orbs focusing on her with what seemed like tremendous effort. Again, Maya felt the gentle touch of the creature's consciousness against her own, and this time the contact lasted longer. Through that connection, she sensed the dragon's surprise at her continued presence, its wonder that such a small being would dare approach when every other form of life in the area had fled or withered away. More than that, Maya sensed the dragon's gratitude, not for any help she might provide, but simply for the fact that she had not abandoned it to die alone. The emotion was so pure and overwhelming that tears sprang to Maya's eyes, and she had to blink rapidly to clear her vision. In all her 12 years of life, she had never experienced anything so profound as the thanks of this dying cosmic being for the simple gift of companionship in its final moments. Drawing upon reserves of courage she hadn't known she possessed, Maya knelt beside the dragon's great head and spoke aloud for the first time since entering the clearing. Her voice sounded thin and small in the oppressive silence, but she forced herself to speak clearly and calmly. "I don't know if this will help," she said, holding up her water bottle, "but it's all I have. I'm sorry I can't do more." The dragon's eyes widened slightly, and Maya felt a tremor of emotion pass through their mental connection. Surprise, she realized. The creature was surprised that she had spoken to it directly, acknowledging its consciousness and treating it as a thinking being rather than simply a phenomenon to be observed. That surprise was quickly followed by something else, hope, fragile and tentative, but unmistakably real. With hands that trembled only slightly, Maya tilted her water bottle and began to pour its contents onto the dry, cracked earth near the dragon's massive muzzle. The water seemed to disappear almost instantly upon contact with the ground, absorbed so quickly that Maya wondered if she had imagined pouring it at all. Yet something was happening. The cracks in the earth began to close, slowly at first, then, with increasing speed. A faint green tinge appeared in the soil, as if microscopic plant life was suddenly blooming where the water had touched. The dragon's breathing, which had been growing steadily more labored throughout Maya's approach, suddenly steadied and deepened. The creature's eyes brightened, not dramatically, but enough that Maya could see the difference. More importantly, she could feel the difference through their mental connection. Where before there had been only pain and exhaustion, now there was a tiny spark of renewed vitality, small but growing stronger with each passing moment. Encouraged by this initial response, Maya continued pouring until her bottle was empty. Each drop seemed to have an effect far out of proportion to its size, spreading life and energy through the parched earth in expanding circles. The crystalline formations on the nearby rocks began to glow more brightly, and the twisted trees started to show signs of renewed health, their strange coloration gradually giving way to more natural green hues. As the last drops of water fell from her bottle, Maya sat back on her heels and watched in amazement as the changes accelerated around her. The dragon's scales began to regain their lustrous, color-shifting appearance, and its wings stirred slightly, no longer pressed against its body in attitudes of defeat and exhaustion. Most remarkably, the creature's eyes now held not just awareness, but genuine alertness, as if it was truly seeing its surroundings for the first time in eons. The mental connection between Maya and the dragon strengthened, and suddenly, she was flooded with images and sensations that threatened to overwhelm her young mind. She saw vast starfields and alien worlds, cosmic battles that raged across galaxies, and civilizations that rose and fell like waves upon a cosmic shore. She saw the dragon in its prime, soaring between worlds, serving as guardian and protector to species she could not begin to identify. She saw the slow decline that had brought the ancient being to this remote corner of Earth, searching for something that only now, through her simple act of kindness, had it finally found. As the visions faded, Maya found herself looking into eyes that held depths of gratitude beyond anything she had ever imagined possible. The dragon was not merely thankful for the water she had provided. It was grateful for something far more precious, the recognition of its dignity as a conscious being, the willingness of another sapient creature to offer aid without thought of reward or recognition, and the proof that compassion existed in the universe on a scale both grand and intimate. Through their connection, Maya began to understand that her small act of kindness had accomplished something that cosmic forces and advanced technologies had failed to achieve. She had not simply provided water to a thirsty creature, she had demonstrated the fundamental interconnectedness of all conscious life, the principle that no being, no matter how powerful or how humble, need face suffering alone if others are willing to extend themselves in service of compassion. The dragon's massive head lifted from the ground with movements that, while still careful and deliberate, showed a vitality that had been completely absent moments before. Those ancient eyes fixed upon Maya with an intensity that might have been frightening if not for the warmth and gratitude that flowed through their mental link. When the creature spoke, it was not with voice but directly into Maya's mind, the words arriving with a clarity and precision that left no doubt of their meaning. Child of Earth, the dragon communicated, you have given me far more than water. You have given me hope, and, in doing so, you have changed the destiny of worlds yet unknown to your species. The gift you have offered freely, without thought of reward, has bound our fates together in ways that neither of us can yet fully comprehend. What happens next will reshape not just my existence, but the very nature of how intelligence and compassion interact across the cosmos. Maya felt a thrill of excitement mixed with apprehension at these words. She understood instinctively that she stood at a crossroads, that her simple hike into the woods had somehow placed her at the center of events far larger than anything she had ever imagined. The rational part of her mind still struggled to accept that any of this was real, but the evidence of her senses and the profound emotional connection she shared with the dragon left no room for doubt. As the ancient being continued to recover from its near-death state, Maya became aware that other changes were occurring around them. The air itself seemed to be shifting, taking on qualities that reminded her of the moment just before dawn, when night gives way to day and all things seem possible. The clearing, which had seemed isolated and removed from the normal world, now felt like a nexus point, a place where different realities might converge and new possibilities might be born. Maya Chen, 12-year-old amateur geologist and lover of mysteries, realized that she was about to become part of something that would challenge everything she thought she knew about the universe and her place within it. The dragon's recovery was unlike anything Maya had ever witnessed. As minutes passed, the creature's breathing became deeper and more regular, and the color-shifting scales along its massive form began to pulse with renewed energy. The twisted trees around the clearing straightened with audible creaks and groans, their blue-green needles gradually returning to natural forest hues. Most remarkably, the cracked earth beneath the dragon's body began to bloom with tiny flowers that sparkled like scattered jewels in the dappled sunlight. Through their mental connection, Maya could feel the dragon's strength returning in waves. Each surge of renewed vitality brought with it flashes of memory and knowledge that made her head spin with their intensity. She saw glimpses of technologies that defied every law of physics she had learned in school, witnessed the birth of stars from the dragon's perspective, and felt echoes of conversations with beings whose very existence challenged her understanding of what life could be. Your name, the dragon's voice resonated in her mind with growing clarity. I would know the name of the one who has saved me from the void between existence and oblivion. Maya, she replied, both aloud and through their mental link. Maya Chen. The dragon's great head tilted slightly, as if considering the weight and meaning of her simple human name. Maya Chen of the world called Earth, the creature repeated, and somehow those words, spoken in the depths of her mind, seemed to carry significance far beyond their surface meaning. I am known by many names across the galaxy, but to you, who have shown me kindness when I was most vulnerable, I shall be Ethros. It means eternal wanderer in the first language ever spoken among the stars. As Ethros continued to regain strength, Maya became increasingly aware that their encounter was having effects beyond the immediate clearing. Her smartphone, which had been providing increasingly distorted readings since she entered the strange forest, now showed impossible readings on its various sensors. The GPS function displayed coordinates that placed her simultaneously in multiple locations across the globe, while the magnetometer spun wildly as if unable to find magnetic north. Most unsettling of all, her phone's camera now showed her surroundings overlaid with patterns of light and energy that her naked eyes could not perceive. The boundaries grow thin, Ethros explained, noting her confusion with the electronic device. When one such as I returns from the edge of extinction, reality itself must adjust to accommodate the change. Your world, your dimension, is beginning to sense the presence of forces that have been absent for millennia. The water you shared was not merely H2O, child. It was carrier of life force, of the fundamental energy that connects all conscious beings across space and time. By freely offering it to me, you have created a bridge between your reality and mine. Maya struggled to process the implications of what Ethros was telling her. Are you saying that I've somehow changed reality? That doesn't make sense. I'm just a kid with a water bottle. The dragon's mental laughter was like the sound of wind chimes made from crystallized starlight. Just a kid, perhaps, but a kid who chose compassion over fear, action over paralysis. Do you understand the rarity of such choices in a cosmos filled with beings who possess power beyond your imagination but lack the courage to use it for anything beyond their own preservation? Your species is young, Maya Chen, barely more than infants in cosmic terms, yet you have demonstrated a capacity for selfless action that beings with millions of years of experience often cannot achieve. As if to demonstrate the truth of these words, the air around them began to shimmer and dance with colors that had no names in any human language. Maya watched in fascination as the shimmering coalesced into what appeared to be a three-dimensional map of the galaxy, suspended in the space above Ethros's great head. Points of light moved along what she assumed were travel routes, while other areas pulsed with different colors that seemed to indicate various types of activity or energy concentrations. For countless eons, Ethros continued, manipulating the galactic display with subtle movements of thought. I have served as what your species might call a mediator between the various forms of consciousness that inhabit this galaxy. My kind, the Vethmari, were among the first to achieve true immortality and interstellar travel. We appointed ourselves guardians of the cosmic balance, protectors of emerging civilizations, and arbiters of disputes that might otherwise consume entire star systems. The display zoomed in on particular regions, showing Maya civilizations that defied her wildest dreams of what alien life might be like. She saw crystal beings that existed as pure mathematics, liquid entities that flowed between planets like cosmic rivers, and vast collective consciousness that spanned multiple dimensions simultaneously. Each civilization was marked with symbols that seemed to indicate their relationship with the Vethmari, and Maya noted that many of these symbols appeared to indicate conflict or tension. But power, even when wielded with the best of intentions, corrupts over time. Ethros's mental voice carried a note of profound sadness. My people began to see themselves not as servants of cosmic balance but as its masters. We made decisions for younger species without consulting them, imposed our understanding of right and wrong upon beings who had their own valid perspectives, and gradually became the very thing we had originally sought to prevent: tyrants who used superior force to impose their will upon the galaxy. The galactic display shifted, showing new patterns of movement and activity. Maya could see that many of the civilizations that had once been marked as allies of the Vethmari were now coated with different symbols, ones that clearly indicated hostility or separation. The routes between star systems, which had once formed a complex web of interconnection, had been broken into isolated segments, as if the galaxy had fragmented into competing territories. A war began, Ethros continued, not a war of weapons and armies as your species understands conflict, but a war of ideologies and fundamental approaches to existence. On one side stood my people and those who believed that the galaxy needed strong guidance from those with the wisdom of ages. On the other stood the younger species, allied with some of our own kind who had grown to question our methods, believing that each civilization should be free to make its own choices, even if those choices led to mistakes or suffering. Maya found herself deeply engaged with this cosmic history lesson, but she also sensed that Ethros was building towards something more immediate and personal. Where do you fit into all this? She asked. The dragon's great eyes fixed upon her with an intensity that conveyed both regret and determination. I was one of those who began to question our methods, Maya-chan. I witnessed civilizations that our intervention had stunted or destroyed, saw the fear and resentment that our protection had bred among species that might have flourished if left to develop naturally. When the philosophical divide among my people became an open conflict, I chose to side with those who advocated for freedom and self-determination, even knowing that such a choice would make me an exile from my own kind. The galactic display now showed a different pattern, with certain points of light moving away from the main concentrations of Vethmari influence. Maya realized she was seeing a visual representation of the ancient civil war that had torn apart one of the galaxy's most powerful species, with Ethros and others like him choosing exile over complicity in what they saw as cosmic tyranny. For millions of your years, I have wandered the galaxy alone, seeking to undo some of the damage my people had done, helping younger species develop their own strength and wisdom without imposing my will upon them. It has been a lonely existence, child, made bearable only by the knowledge that somewhere in the cosmos, freedom and compassion still had champions. Maya felt a chill of understanding. But something went wrong. That's why you were dying when I found you. The war has entered a new phase, Ethros confirmed, his mental voice growing heavier with concern. My people have developed new weapons, new methods of control that operate not through force but through manipulation of the fundamental forces that bind conscious minds together. They have learned to drain the life force from entire worlds, to extinguish the spark of free will that makes true consciousness possible. I came to this remote corner of the galaxy, to your world, not by accident but in desperate flight from agents of my own kind who seek to eliminate all who oppose their vision of cosmic order. The implications of this revelation hit Maya like a physical blow. They're coming here? To Earth? They were, Ethros replied, and Maya caught a subtle but important distinction in the tense he used. I led them here deliberately, choosing this world as the place where I would make my final stand, not because I wished to bring danger to your species, but because I sensed something in the life force of your world that might provide the key to defeating their new weapons. I did not expect to find that key in the compassionate heart of a single human child. Maya's mind raced with questions and fears, but before she could voice any of them, Ethros continued his explanation. The weapon they have developed feeds on despair, on isolation, on the conviction that consciousness exists in permanent separation from everything else in the universe. It grows stronger when beings believe they are alone, when they lose faith in the possibility of genuine connection and mutual aid. But what you have shown me here, Maya Chen, the simple act of offering help to a being you did not understand, has created a resonance that their weapon cannot touch. As if to illustrate this point, the galactic display shifted once more, focusing now on Earth and the surrounding space. Maya could see patterns of energy converging on her world from multiple directions, but she also noticed something else, a growing field of light centered on their exact location, pulsing outward in concentric rings that seemed to be affecting the approaching energy patterns in significant ways. Your act of compassion has created what we might call a beacon, Ethros explained. A signal that broadcasts across space and time the fundamental truth that consciousness need not exist in isolation, that beings can choose to help one another even when doing so offers no obvious benefit to themselves. This signal is already beginning to affect other members of your species, awakening in them a heightened awareness of their connection to all life. Maya looked around the clearing with new eyes, suddenly, aware that the changes she was witnessing were just the beginning of something much larger. The flowers blooming in the previously barren earth were not just signs of Ethros' recovery, they were physical manifestations of a transformation that was spreading outward from this point like ripples in a cosmic pond. What does this mean for Earth? For humanity? Maya asked, though part of her already suspected the answer would be both wonderful and terrifying. It means, dear child, that your species stands at a crossroads unlike any other in its history. The approaching Vethmari forces expected to find a world of isolated, frightened beings who would either submit to their control or be easily conquered. Instead, they will encounter something they have not seen in millennia, a species awakening to its full potential for compassion and cooperation, guided by the example of one small human who chose kindness over indifference. The dragon's massive form was now fully restored to health, scales gleaming with inner fire and wings spread slightly to catch the strange energies that flowed through the clearing. Yet despite his obvious power and ancient wisdom, Ethros regarded Maya with a respect that seemed to acknowledge her as an equal partner in whatever was to come. The water you shared has bound our destinies together, he continued. Where I was dying and alone, I am now renewed and allied with a being whose capacity for selfless action exceeds that of civilizations with technology beyond your current understanding. The Vethmari forces that pursue me will arrive within days, expecting to complete their mission of eliminating the last opposition to their vision of cosmic order. Instead, they will face something entirely unexpected, the combined power of ancient knowledge and youthful compassion, working in harmony to defend the right of all conscious beings to choose their own path through existence. Maya felt a mixture of excitement and terror at these words. The rational part of her mind insisted that she was just a 12-year-old girl who had gotten in way over her head, but the deeper connection she shared with Ethros carried certainties that transcended rational analysis. She could feel the truth of what he was telling her, could sense the approaching convergence of forces that would transform not just her own life but the destiny of her entire species. I'm scared, she admitted, her honesty strengthened rather than weakened by their mental bond. Fear is appropriate, Ethros acknowledged. What approaches will challenge everything your people believe about their place in the universe? But fear need not paralyze, Maya Chen. It can also motivate, can drive beings to achievements they never thought possible. You have already accomplished something that the greatest philosophers and warriors of my species considered impossible. You have created a bridge between different forms of consciousness based purely on the recognition of shared vulnerability and the choice to offer aid despite personal risk. As Ethros spoke these words, Maya became aware of subtle changes in her own perception. Colors seemed more vivid, sounds carried overtones she had never noticed before, and she found herself increasingly sensitive to the emotional states of the life around her. She could feel the contentment of the trees as they returned to their natural forms, sense the joy of small creatures as they cautiously returned to a clearing that had previously been too dangerous to approach, and, most remarkably, detect faint echoes of awakening consciousness from the direction of human civilization. The changes have already begun, Ethros observed, noting her expanded awareness. The beacon we have created together is not merely sending signals into space, it is awakening latent potentials within your own species. Humans who have never experienced telepathic contact are beginning to sense the emotions of those around them. Scientists are making intuitive leaps that advance their understanding by decades in mere moments. Artists are creating works that capture truths about the nature of consciousness that previous generations could only guess at. Maya closed her eyes and extended her newfound sensitivity outward, amazed to discover that she could indeed perceive traces of enhanced awareness spreading through human populations around the globe. It was subtle, like the first hints of dawn on a cloudy morning, but unmistakably real. Humanity was beginning to wake up to possibilities it had never imagined, and she was somehow at the center of that awakening. But awakening is not the same as preparation, Ethros warned. When the Vethmari forces arrive, they will attempt to exploit your species' sudden expansion of consciousness, will try to overwhelm human minds with despair and isolation before they have learned to defend against such attacks. We have perhaps 4 of your days to prepare Earth's population for contact with cosmic forces that could either elevate them to heights of achievement beyond current imagination or crush them beneath the weight of realities they are not yet equipped to handle. Maya opened her eyes and looked directly into Ethros's ancient gaze, feeling the full weight of responsibility settling upon her shoulders. She was no longer just a curious child who had wandered off the beaten path, she had become the focal point for humanity's introduction to galactic civilization, the bridge between her species and forces beyond their current understanding. "What do we need to do?" she asked, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what lay ahead. Ethros's mental presence filled with warmth and approval at her question. "We need to teach your species, in the space of mere days, lessons that typically take civilizations millennia to learn. We need to show them that consciousness is not limited by the boundaries of individual bodies, that compassion is not weakness but the fundamental force that holds the universe together, and that even the smallest act of kindness can reshape the destiny of worlds." As if in response to these words, the clearing around them began to transform once more. The flowers blooming in the restored earth grew larger and more luminous, their petals beginning to pulse with patterns of light that conveyed complex information directly to Maya's expanded consciousness. The crystalline formations on nearby rocks started singing with harmonics that carried meanings beyond language, and the air itself became charged with possibilities that made every breath feel like an invitation to transcendence. Maya Chen, standing in a forest clearing beside an ancient alien dragon, realized that her simple act of kindness had triggered a transformation that would either save her world or doom it to cosmic irrelevance. The choice between those outcomes would depend on whether humanity could learn, in just a few short days, to embrace its own potential for compassion and connection in the face of forces beyond anything they had ever imagined possible. The transformation of the forest clearing accelerated throughout the afternoon, but Maya soon discovered that the changes were not confined to their immediate location. Through her expanding connection with Ethros, she became aware of similar phenomena occurring around the globe. In the Amazon rainforest, indigenous shamans reported visions of impossible clarity, while in the laboratories of major universities, quantum physicists found their equations suddenly solving themselves with elegant solutions that had eluded them for years. Artists in Paris awoke from dreams with perfect recall of paintings they had never seen, and children in playgrounds from Tokyo to New York began speaking in languages that linguists could not identify but somehow everyone understood. "The awakening spreads faster than I anticipated," Ethros communicated, his massive form now fully restored and radiating energy that made the air around them shimmer like heat waves. "Your species possesses a remarkable capacity for rapid adaptation. Where other civilizations required generations to develop even basic telepathic abilities, humans are achieving significant breakthroughs within hours of first contact with expanded consciousness." Maya found herself serving as a living conduit for this planetary awakening. Through her connection with Ethros, she could perceive the experiences of people around the world as they encountered their first glimpses of cosmic awareness. A surgeon in Mumbai suddenly understood the emotional state of every patient she treated, allowing her to provide comfort that accelerated healing beyond anything she had thought possible. A farmer in Kansas realized he could sense the needs of his crops directly, leading to an intuitive understanding of agricultural techniques that promised to revolutionize food production. A teacher in Stockholm discovered she could perceive the learning style of each student individually, adapting her instruction in real time to maximize every child's potential. It's beautiful, Maya whispered, tears streaming down her face as she experienced the wonder and joy of billions of humans discovering abilities they had never dreamed possible. But it's also overwhelming. How will people handle all these changes? Some will struggle, Ethros admitted, his mental voice carrying both hope and concern. Rapid expansion of consciousness always involves risks. There will be those who cannot integrate their new abilities with their existing understanding of reality, who will retreat into denial or madness rather than embrace transformation. Others will attempt to use their expanding awareness for selfish purposes, trying to manipulate or control those around them rather than fostering genuine connection and mutual growth. As if to illustrate this point, Maya's awareness was suddenly flooded with darker images from around the world. In corporate boardrooms, executives attempted to use their newfound empathic abilities to manipulate employees and competitors. Political leaders who had gained access to telepathic insights tried to exploit this advantage for personal power rather than public service. Military commanders began developing strategies to weaponize the expanding consciousness, viewing humanity's transformation as an opportunity to gain advantage over foreign adversaries. But, for every individual who chooses selfishness over service, Ethros continued, there are hundreds who instinctively understand that their new abilities come with responsibilities. Watch. Maya's perspective shifted to focus on the positive responses to humanity's awakening. Medical researchers who had gained intuitive understanding of disease processes were freely sharing their insights across national and corporate boundaries, creating collaborative networks that promised to eliminate suffering on a scale previously unimaginable. Environmental scientists with enhanced awareness of ecological interconnections were developing solutions to climate change that addressed not just the symptoms but the fundamental causes of humanity's destructive relationship with their planet. Religious leaders from different faiths were discovering common ground as their expanded consciousness revealed the underlying unity that their various traditions had always pointed toward but never quite achieved. Your species is demonstrating something remarkable, Ethros observed. Despite all the fear and confusion that rapid change inevitably brings, the majority of humans are choosing to use their expanding abilities to help others rather than to advance their own interests. This is not common among species undergoing cosmic awakening. Most civilizations at this stage of development experience significant periods of chaos and conflict as different groups attempt to gain advantage over their neighbors. Humans seem to possess an unusual capacity for maintaining ethical behavior even under conditions of radical transformation. Maya felt a surge of pride in her species, but this was quickly tempered by awareness of the approaching deadline. Through her connection with Ethros, she could sense the Vethmari forces drawing closer to Earth, their massive vessels moving through space with technology that bent the very fabric of reality to their will. More troubling still, she could perceive the weapons they carried, devices designed to exploit the very consciousness expansion that was currently occurring among humanity. They're going to try to turn our awakening against us, aren't they? Maya asked, though she already knew the answer. The Vethmari have perfected techniques for converting expanded consciousness into paralysis and despair, Ethros confirmed. Their weapons function by overwhelming newly awakened minds with the full scope of cosmic suffering, showing beings every tragedy and injustice that has ever occurred throughout the galaxy. Most species, when confronted with such comprehensive awareness of pain and loss, lose the will to resist and submit to Vethmari control out of a misguided belief that any form of order is preferable to the chaos they perceive in free will and self-determination. The prospect of her entire species being subjected to such psychological warfare filled Maya with determination that surprised her with its intensity. Then, we need to prepare them. We need to teach people how to maintain hope and compassion even when they're shown the worst things that consciousness has ever experienced. Precisely, Ethros agreed, his approval flowing through their mental bond like warm sunlight. But, the question remains, how do we provide such training to billions of individuals in the space of mere days? Traditional educational methods would require years or decades to convey the necessary understanding, and we do not have that luxury. Maya closed her eyes and reached out with her expanding awareness, feeling for the network of awakening consciousness that now spanned the globe. What she discovered amazed her. Humanity was not awakening in isolation but as an interconnected web of consciousness, with each individual's growth contributing to and drawing strength from the expansion of others. The surgeon in Mumbai was unconsciously sharing her healing insights with medical professionals around the world. The farmer in Kansas was contributing his agricultural revelations to a growing global understanding of sustainable food production. The teacher in Stockholm was participating in an informal network of educators who were collectively revolutionizing human learning. We don't need to teach them individually, Maya realized with growing excitement. They're already teaching each other. The awakening itself is creating channels for shared learning that bypass traditional communication methods. What we need to do is provide a framework, a way of organizing and directing this collective growth toward the specific skills they'll need to survive contact with the Vethmari. Ethros regarded her with something approaching awe. In 4 hours of expanded consciousness, you have grasped principles of collective mind dynamics that took my people millennia to discover. Your insight is correct. We can use the very network of awakening consciousness to prepare your species for what is to come. But, such an undertaking will require us to serve as focal points for a global meditation unlike anything ever attempted in your world's history. The implications of what they were contemplating were staggering. Maya would need to open her consciousness to billions of human minds simultaneously, serving as a conduit for knowledge and experiences that could help her entire species develop the psychological resilience necessary to resist Vethmari manipulation. The strain on her individual awareness would be enormous, possibly fatal, but the alternative was the spiritual enslavement of humanity. I can do it, Maya said, her voice steady despite her fear. But I'll need your help to maintain coherence under that kind of load. You shall have more than my help, Ethros promised. There are others, scattered across the galaxy, who have chosen exile rather than submission to the new Vethmari order. Many are too far away to reach Earth in time to assist in the coming confrontation, but they can lend their strength to our efforts through consciousness projection. You will not face this challenge alone, Maya-Chen. As if summoned by his words, Maya became aware of new presences touching the edge of her consciousness. One by one, ancient beings of various species began establishing contact with their small clearing in the forest. She sensed a crystalline entity whose thoughts moved like living mathematics, a collective consciousness that spanned multiple dimensions, and creatures of pure energy who had transcended physical form entirely. Each brought unique perspectives and abilities, but all shared a common commitment to the principle that consciousness should be free to develop according to its own nature rather than external control. The cosmic resistance, Ethros explained as Maya marveled at the diversity of beings now connected to their makeshift network. Not all who oppose Vethmari tyranny are as obvious as dragons in exile. Many work in secret, preserving knowledge and techniques that the official order would see destroyed, waiting for opportunities to strike back against the forces of cosmic uniformity. The presence of these allies filled Maya with confidence, but she also became increasingly aware of the complexity of what they were attempting. Each species in the resistance had developed different approaches to consciousness expansion and mental defense, techniques that reflected their unique evolutionary paths and cultural values. Somehow, they would need to integrate all of this diverse knowledge into a coherent training program that could be absorbed by human minds in a matter of hours. We begin with the fundamentals, Ethros advised, sensing her concerns. All conscious beings, regardless of their species or level of development, share certain basic experiences: the awareness of self, the capacity for choice, the ability to form connections with others, and the potential for growth and change. These commonalities provide a foundation upon which more specific techniques can be built. Over the following hours, Maya found herself at the center of the most intensive educational experience in human history. Through her connection with Ethros and their alien allies, she absorbed techniques for maintaining psychological coherence under extreme stress, methods for distinguishing between genuine emotional responses and artificially induced despair, and strategies for drawing strength from connections with other conscious beings even when those connections were under attack by hostile forces. Each lesson was simultaneously transmitted through the global network of awakening consciousness, reaching every human whose awareness had begun to expand. The surgeon in Mumbai learned to protect her empathic abilities from being overwhelmed by patients' suffering. The farmer in Kansas discovered how to maintain his connection to the natural world even when confronted with images of ecological destruction. The teacher in Stockholm developed techniques for preserving her students' enthusiasm for learning in the face of apparently insurmountable challenges. But the most important lessons were not technical in nature. Maya and her alien allies worked to instill in humanity a deep understanding of the philosophical principles that had driven the cosmic resistance from the beginning: that diversity of thought and experience was not a weakness to be corrected but a strength to be celebrated, that individual growth and collective well-being were not competing goals but complementary aspects of healthy consciousness development, and that the right to choose one's own path through existence was worth any price necessary to preserve it. As the sun began to set over the forest clearing, Maya realized that something unprecedented was occurring. Humanity was not simply learning to defend against Vethmari's psychological weapons, they were developing entirely new approaches to consciousness itself, techniques that drew upon both their own innate abilities and the wisdom of species from across the galaxy. The resulting synthesis was creating forms of awareness that none of the Resistance members had encountered before, hybrid consciousness modalities that combined the best aspects of multiple evolutionary traditions while remaining uniquely human in character. "Your species continues to surprise us," communicated the crystalline entity whose thoughts moved like mathematical equations. "We expected to teach you techniques developed over millions of years by ancient civilizations. Instead, you are creating new methods that improve upon our original approaches." The student has become the teacher. Maya felt a moment of vertigo as she realized the full implications of this development. Humanity was not simply preparing to defend itself against the Vethmari, they were evolving into something that could potentially transform galactic civilization itself. Their rapid adaptation and innovative approaches to consciousness expansion were creating possibilities that even the most advanced species in the cosmic resistance had not previously imagined. "The Vethmari chose your world as the site for eliminating the last organized opposition to their rule," Ethros observed with what might have been amusement if dragons could feel such emotions. "They expected to find a primitive species that could be easily controlled or destroyed. Instead, they will encounter something entirely new, a civilization that has learned to combine ancient wisdom with unprecedented innovation, guided by ethical principles that prioritize collective growth over individual power." As night fell over the clearing, Maya became aware that the global meditation was entering a new phase. The basic defensive techniques had been successfully transmitted to billions of human minds, but now something more complex was beginning to emerge. The network of awakening consciousness was starting to function as a single, vast intelligence, with individual humans serving as specialized nodes in a planetary mind that could process information and generate solutions at speeds that defied all previous understanding of collective consciousness. "We are witnessing the birth of a new form of civilization," observed the multidimensional collective that had joined their resistance network. Not the hierarchical structure that the Vethmari seek to impose, nor the chaotic individualism that many species mistake for freedom, but a dynamic synthesis that preserves individual autonomy while enabling collective action of unprecedented scope and effectiveness. Maya found herself simultaneously exhilarated and exhausted by the day's developments. Through her role as a focal point for humanity's transformation, she had experienced the awakening of her entire species, shared in the wisdom of ancient alien civilizations, and helped guide the emergence of new forms of consciousness that could reshape the galaxy. Yet she was still, at her core, a 12-year-old girl who had started the day with nothing more ambitious in mind than exploring some interesting rock formations. "Tomorrow, the Vethmari forces will arrive," Ethros informed her as the alien allies began to withdraw their direct presence from the network, leaving behind the knowledge and techniques they had shared but allowing human consciousness to develop according to its own nature. "They will expect to find a world of confused, frightened beings who can be easily overwhelmed by demonstrations of superior power and advanced psychological manipulation. Instead, they will encounter something that has never existed before in galactic history, a species that has achieved collective awakening while maintaining individual identity, guided by ethical principles that make them psychologically immune to despair-based weapons, and supported by a network of consciousness that spans not only their own world but reaches out to embrace allies from across the galaxy." Maya nodded, feeling the weight of tomorrow's confrontation but also the strength that came from knowing she would not face it alone. Humanity had been transformed in the space of a single day from an isolated species unaware of cosmic civilization to a participant in galactic affairs whose unique approach to consciousness development offered hope for resolving conflicts that had raged for millennia. As she prepared to leave the clearing and return to her normal life, Maya realized that nothing would ever be normal again. The quiet 12-year-old who had offered water to a dying dragon no longer existed, replaced by someone who served as a bridge between worlds, a focal point for humanity's introduction to its cosmic destiny, and a living symbol of the power that resided in simple acts of compassion and courage. The stars that emerged as darkness deepened over the forest were no longer distant points of light but destinations waiting to be explored, inhabited by beings who were no longer alien strangers but potential allies in the greatest adventure consciousness had ever undertaken. Tomorrow would bring challenges unlike any that humanity had ever faced, but tonight, Maya Chen could rest in the knowledge that her species was as prepared as it was possible to be for whatever lay ahead. Maya awoke before dawn to the sound of reality itself shifting around her. The small bedroom in her family's suburban home, which had been her sanctuary for 12 years, now thrummed with energies that made the walls seem transparent and the ceiling fade into infinite depths of star-filled space. Through the windows, she could see that the morning sky was wrong, painted with colors that had no names and crossed by geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly but conveyed complex information when viewed peripherally. Her parents were still asleep, and Maya could sense their dreams filled with visions of mathematical equations that solved themselves, paintings that moved and spoke, and music that could heal emotional wounds with its harmonics. The awakening that had begun with her encounter with Ethros was now complete, encompassing every human consciousness on Earth, but today would test whether humanity's rapid transformation had prepared them for what was coming. Through her expanded awareness, Maya could perceive the approaching Vethmari fleet with terrifying clarity. 12 massive vessels, each the size of a small moon and powered by technology that harvested energy from the fundamental forces of creation, were emerging from hyperspace at the edge of Earth's solar system. Their approach was deliberate and unhurried, the confident advance of predators who had never encountered prey capable of meaningful resistance. But, as Maya extended her consciousness toward the alien fleet, she encountered something unexpected: fear. The Vethmari had detected the transformation that had occurred on Earth, and what they found was so far outside their experience that it had shaken their certainty for the first time in millennia. They had expected to find a world of isolated individuals whose consciousness could be easily overwhelmed and controlled. Instead, their sensors showed them a planetary mind of unprecedented complexity and coherence, supported by technologies of consciousness that they did not recognize and could not immediately counter. They pause because they do not understand what they face, Ethros communicated from the forest clearing where he had remained throughout the night, his presence now a permanent anchor point in Maya's awareness. For millions of years, the Vethmari have conquered through superior force and psychological manipulation, relying on their victims' isolation and despair to ensure easy victories. Your species has developed immunities to their traditional weapons while creating new capabilities that they have never encountered before. Through the global network of awakening consciousness, Maya could feel billions of humans preparing for contact with cosmic forces beyond their previous imagination. But this preparation was unlike anything that had ever occurred in galactic history. Rather than arming themselves with weapons or building defenses, humanity was opening itself to ever deeper levels of compassion and connection, using their expanding consciousness not to exclude or destroy their enemies but to understand and potentially transform them. The surgeon in Mumbai was preparing to extend her healing abilities beyond physical bodies to the psychological wounds that drove beings toward tyranny and control. The farmer in Kansas was ready to share his understanding of sustainable growth with species that had forgotten how to nurture rather than exploit. The teacher in Stockholm was developing techniques for helping even ancient beings learn new approaches to existence. Across the globe, humans were preparing to respond to invasion not with violence but with the most powerful force in the universe, the offer of genuine connection and the possibility of redemption. It is beautiful and terrifying, observed the crystalline entity that maintained contact with their resistance network. Your species is attempting something that no civilization has ever successfully achieved, the conversion of would-be conquerors through the demonstration of superior compassion rather than superior force. The risk of failure is enormous, but the potential rewards could transform the nature of cosmic civilization itself. Maya felt the weight of this moment settling upon her as she dressed and prepared for what might be the most important day in human history. Through her connection with the global consciousness network, she could perceive the Vethmari fleet beginning its final approach toward Earth, their vessels creating distortions in spacetime that registered as subtle but persistent earthquakes around the globe. In response, humanity was not mobilizing armies or activating defensive systems, but instead entering into the deepest collective meditation ever achieved by any species, preparing to greet their potential destroyers with open hearts and expanded minds. The first contact occurred at precisely noon, Earth time, as the lead Vethmari vessel entered the planet's atmosphere above the Pacific Ocean. The ship was a masterwork of cosmic engineering, its crystalline hull shifting between dimensions as it descended, surrounded by energy fields that could reshape matter at the molecular level. To conventional human senses, it would have appeared as an apocalyptic vision, a harbinger of destruction beyond imagination. But, to Earth's awakened consciousness, it registered as something entirely different, a cry for help from beings so damaged by their own power that they had forgotten what genuine existence felt like. Maya found herself serving as the primary focal point for humanity's response to first contact. Through her connection with Ethros and the global network, she could perceive the emotional states of the beings aboard the Vethmari vessel with startling clarity. What she discovered challenged every assumption about the nature of cosmic tyranny that the Resistance had held for millennia. The Vethmari were not evil in any conventional sense. They were broken beings whose immortal existence had become an unbearable burden of accumulated grief and disappointment. Having lived for millions of years, they had witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations, seen every form of beauty eventually fade into entropy, and experienced the death of so many beings they had cared about that they had finally chosen to stop caring at all. Their attempts to impose order upon the galaxy were not driven by malice but by a desperate need to prevent any more loss, to create a static universe where nothing could change and, therefore, nothing could be destroyed. They have chosen the safety of death over the risks of life, Ethros observed as Maya shared her insights through the Resistance network. In their effort to prevent suffering, they have created a form of existence so sterile and empty that it constitutes the very suffering they sought to avoid. They are trapped in a paradox of their own making, unable to find meaning in existence but equally unable to choose non-existence. The lead Vethmari vessel settled into a stable orbit above Earth, and Maya could sense the beings aboard struggling to understand what they were encountering. Their consciousness scanning technologies, designed to map and manipulate the mental states of their victims, were returning impossible readings. Instead of finding billions of isolated minds that could be easily dominated, they discovered a single, unified awareness that somehow preserved the individuality of its component parts while achieving collective capabilities that surpassed their own. More disturbing still, from the Vethmari perspective, was the emotional resonance they encountered when they attempted to project despair-inducing images into human consciousness. Every horrific scene they transmitted, every example of cosmic suffering and meaningless loss, was absorbed by Earth's awakened minds and transformed into something else entirely: motivation for greater compassion, fuel for deeper commitment to connection and growth, and evidence of the urgent need for healing on a galactic scale. "We grieve for your pain," came humanity's response, transmitted through Maya as the focal point for global consciousness but carrying the emotional weight of billions of awakened minds. "We see the wounds that have driven you to choose control over freedom, safety over growth, isolation over connection. We do not judge you for the choices you have made in your suffering, but we invite you to consider that there might be other paths forward, ways of existing that honor both the reality of loss and the possibility of renewal." The Vethmari fleet reacted to this response with confusion that rapidly escalated into something approaching panic. Their psychological weapons, refined over millions of years and tested against countless species, were not merely failing but actively backfiring. Each attempt to induce despair in human consciousness was being converted into an invitation for healing that reached across space to touch their own long-buried capacity for hope. Through her connection with the lead vessel, Maya could perceive the internal debate raging among the Vethmari commanders. Some advocated for immediate retreat, recognizing that they faced something completely outside their experience and, therefore, beyond their ability to control. Others pushed for the deployment of more conventional weapons, arguing that if psychological manipulation could not subdue humanity, then simple annihilation remained an option. But a third faction was beginning to emerge, beings whose ancient cynicism was being eroded by prolonged exposure to Earth's transformative compassion. "This is unprecedented," communicated the multidimensional collective that observed the confrontation through the Resistance network. "In millions of years of galactic history, no species has ever successfully defended itself against Vethmari conquest through pure emotional transformation of the attackers. Your approach is either the greatest strategic breakthrough in cosmic warfare or the most beautiful form of collective suicide ever attempted." Maya felt the truth of both possibilities as she maintained her role as humanity's voice in this first contact. If their approach succeeded, it would prove that even the most damaged and destructive beings could be reached through genuine compassion and the offer of authentic connection. If it failed, humanity would face destruction by forces that their non-violent response had left them technically defenseless against. The fate of her entire species hung in the balance, determined not by weapons or defenses but by the depth of their commitment to treating even their enemies as conscious beings worthy of understanding and healing. The crisis point arrived when the Vethmari deployed their ultimate weapon, a consciousness bomb designed to show its targets every moment of suffering that had ever occurred throughout galactic history, concentrating eons of pain and loss into a single overwhelming experience that had never failed to drive victims into catatonic despair. The weapon detonated in Earth's atmosphere with a force that sent shockwaves through dimensions, its psychic payload seeking out every awakened human mind on the planet. For a moment that seemed to stretch across eternity, Maya and every other human experienced the full weight of cosmic suffering. They saw civilizations burned to ash by their own hatred, witnessed the slow extinction of species that had never learned to cooperate, felt the despair of beings who had lived so long that existence itself became meaningless. The accumulated grief of millions of years crashed over human consciousness like a tsunami of pure anguish, seeking to prove that hope was nothing more than a delusion that life used to torture itself with false possibilities. But, instead of breaking under this impossible burden, something remarkable happened. Humanity did not deny the reality of cosmic suffering or attempt to minimize its significance. Instead, they opened themselves completely to the experience, allowing the pain to flow through their collective consciousness without resistance, while simultaneously holding space for every being who had ever suffered with a compassion so profound that it transformed the very nature of the pain itself. "We see you," humanity responded to the cosmic grief that threatened to overwhelm them. "We witness your pain and acknowledge its reality. But, we also see the consciousness that experienced this suffering, the awareness that survived these losses, the beings who continued to exist despite everything they had endured. In every moment of pain, there was also a moment of consciousness brave enough to experience it. In every loss, there was also love strong enough to grieve. In every ending, there was also a beginning that had been worth protecting. We do not minimize your suffering, but we refuse to let that suffering have the final word about the meaning of existence." The response echoed through space with a power that surprised even the ancient beings of the cosmic resistance. Humanity had not simply survived the Vethmari's ultimate weapon, they had transformed it into something else entirely, converting an instrument of despair into a tool for healing that reached backward through time to touch every moment of suffering it had contained. The psychological bomb that was supposed to destroy Earth's awakened consciousness instead became a bridge of empathy that connected human awareness to every being that had ever experienced loss, offering comfort to pain that had echoed through the cosmos for millions of years. Aboard the Vethmari vessels, something unprecedented began to occur. Beings who had not felt genuine emotion for eons found themselves weeping for losses they had buried so deeply that they had forgotten how to mourn. The consciousness bomb, rebounding from Earth's transformative response, was carrying humanity's compassion back to its creators, forcing them to confront not just the suffering they had attempted to weaponize but also their own capacity for healing and renewal. "Impossible," transmitted the Vethmari fleet commander, but Maya could hear uncertainty in what should have been an expression of disbelief. "No species can survive direct exposure to the totality of cosmic suffering. No consciousness can process such information without fragmenting into permanent madness." "What are you?" "We are what you were before you chose fear over love," Maya responded, her words carrying the weight of 6 billion awakened human minds. "We are what you could become again if you chose growth over safety, connection over control, hope over despair. We are not your enemies, ancient ones. We are your children, your students, your chance for redemption. We are the possibility that existence might mean something more than the accumulation of power and the avoidance of loss." Through the resistance network, Maya could sense the amazement of beings who had opposed Vethmari tyranny for millennia but had never imagined that their enemies might be transformed rather than destroyed. The crystalline entity's mathematical thoughts shifted into patterns of wonder, while the multidimensional collective's communications took on harmonics that suggested the emergence of entirely new possibilities for cosmic civilization. As the day wore on, more Vethmari vessels began to experience the same transformation that had affected the lead ship. One by one, beings who had ruled the galaxy through fear and control found themselves remembering what it felt like to hope, to dream, to imagine futures that contain more than the mere prevention of loss. Some resisted the change, retreating into deeper layers of their defensive emotional armor, but others began to open themselves to possibilities they had not considered for millions of years. "The fleet is fragmenting," Ethros reported from his position in the forest clearing. 3 vessels have moved into higher orbit and are requesting permission to establish formal contact with your world's authorities. 4 others are maintaining their original positions but have deactivated their weapons systems. The remaining 5 are pulling back to the edge of your solar system, apparently engaged in internal debates about whether to continue their mission or abandon it entirely. Maya felt a mixture of triumph and exhaustion as she processed this information. Humanity's gambit had succeeded beyond their wildest hopes, but the work of transformation was far from complete. Converting a few Vethmari vessels was one thing, reshaping an interstellar civilization that had been built on principles of control and domination would require sustained effort on a scale that dwarfed even what they had accomplished in the past 2 days. This is only the beginning, she realized, speaking aloud for the first time in hours. We've proven that transformation is possible, but now we need to help them learn how to live differently. They've forgotten how to find meaning in existence without controlling everything around them. They need to rediscover what it feels like to be part of something larger than themselves without losing their individual identity in the process. Through the global consciousness network, Maya could sense humanity preparing for the next phase of first contact, not the dramatic confrontation between conquerors and conquered, but the slow, careful work of helping damaged beings remember how to heal. It would be the greatest therapeutic undertaking in galactic history, requiring every form of wisdom and compassion that human civilization had ever developed. As evening fell over Earth, Maya looked up at a sky filled with alien vessels that had arrived as harbingers of doom but were now becoming the first participants in humanity's greatest experiment, the proof that consciousness could choose healing over hatred, growth over control, and love over fear, even after millions of years of choosing otherwise. The small girl who had offered water to a dying dragon had become the catalyst for a transformation that would echo through the cosmos for eons to come. 6 months after first contact, Maya stood on the observation deck of the New Geneva Galactic Embassy, watching as construction crews from 17 different species worked together to build what would become the first permanent interstellar diplomatic facility in human history. The building itself was a marvel of cooperative engineering, incorporating architectural principles from civilizations across the galaxy while maintaining a distinctly human aesthetic that emphasized openness, growth, and organic harmony with the surrounding environment. The transformation that had begun with her simple act of kindness in a forest clearing had rippled outward through space and time, touching civilizations that had never heard of Earth and species that had evolved in galaxies far from the Milky Way. The network of consciousness that humanity had developed was now serving as a model for other worlds seeking to move beyond the ancient patterns of domination and submission that had characterized galactic politics for millions of years. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the embassy, Maya could see the bustling activity of the first truly integrated cosmic community. Vethmari engineers, their crystalline exoskeletons now glowing with warm hues that reflected their renewed capacity for joy, worked alongside human architects to design living spaces that could accommodate beings of radically different physiologies and consciousness types. The multidimensional collective that had joined the cosmic resistance now manifested as shimmering geometric patterns that danced through the air, communicating with both humans and former enemies through harmonics that conveyed emotional states more accurately than any spoken language ever could. The changes continued to accelerate, Ethros observed as he joined Maya at the observation window. The ancient dragon had taken a more compact form for indoor spaces, though he retained the essential magnificence that had first captured Maya's attention in the forest clearing. 17 species have now adopted variations of the consciousness networking techniques that humanity pioneered. 3 former Vethmari colony worlds have declared independence and established democratic governments based on principles of collective wisdom and individual autonomy. Even the most conservative factions within the old galactic order are beginning to acknowledge that fundamental changes are not only inevitable but potentially beneficial. Maya nodded, her attention split between the scene outside and the constant flow of information that reached her through her role as one of humanity's primary ambassadors to cosmic civilization. At 13, she was among the youngest diplomats in galactic history, but her unique position as the focal point for Earth's awakening made her perspective invaluable in negotiations that often involved concepts and experiences far beyond normal human understanding. The transformation of the Vethmari had proven to be the most complex and rewarding aspect of the post-contact period. Beings who had lived for millions of years in emotional isolation were learning to form genuine connections with others, but the process was neither simple nor always successful. Some former tyrants had embraced their rehabilitation with the enthusiasm of beings discovering joy for the first time in eons, while others struggled with psychological patterns so deeply ingrained that change seemed almost impossible. Ambassador Veldar is requesting a private consultation, Maya's communication implant informed her, using the diplomatic protocols that had been developed to facilitate interaction between species with radically different consciousness types. The subject matter appears to involve personal rather than official business. Maya sighed, recognizing the request as another in a series of informal therapy sessions that had become an unexpected but important part of her diplomatic responsibilities. Veldar was one of the Vethmari who had been most resistant to transformation, a being whose millions of years of existence had been devoted so completely to the accumulation and exercise of power that he struggled to find meaning in any other form of activity. "I'll meet him in the contemplation garden," Maya responded, having learned that Veldar found it easier to discuss personal matters when surrounded by the living beauty that had been one of the first casualties of Vethmari rule. The garden itself was another marvel of interspecies cooperation, featuring plants and other life forms from dozens of worlds arranged in patterns that promoted psychological healing and emotional balance for visitors from any species. The contemplation garden occupied the center of the embassy complex, its design based on ancient human therapeutic principles enhanced by wisdom from civilizations across the galaxy. Maya found Veldar standing beside a fountain whose waters had been programmed at the molecular level to produce harmonics that encouraged emotional openness and reduced defensive psychological barriers. Ambassador Chen, Veldar greeted her, his towering crystalline form shifting through color patterns that indicated deep confusion and frustration. "I find myself once again requiring your guidance in matters that should be simple but somehow remain beyond my comprehension." Maya settled onto one of the meditation benches that surrounded the fountain, having learned that these conversations worked best when she maintained a relaxed, non-threatening posture that encouraged openness rather than formal diplomatic protocol. "What's troubling you today, Veldar?" "I have been observing the human children who visit this facility with their families," the ancient being admitted, his colors shifting to hues that Maya had learned indicated vulnerability and uncertainty. "They display behaviors that make no logical sense from the perspective of efficient resource utilization or strategic advantage, yet they seem to derive genuine satisfaction from these activities. I find myself curious about the nature of what humans call play." Maya smiled, recognizing the deeper question that lay beneath Veldar's seemingly simple observation. For beings who had devoted millions of years to the serious business of cosmic domination, the concept of engaging in activities purely for the joy they provided was almost incomprehensible. Yet she had learned that this inability to find pleasure in existence was one of the primary factors that had driven the Vethmari toward their destructive path of seeking meaning only through the control of others. "Play is one of the ways humans learn about possibility," Maya explained, drawing upon insights she had gained through her expanded connection with both individual and collective human consciousness. "When children play, they explore different ways of being, different relationships between cause and effect, different approaches to problem solving. But, more than that, play teaches us that activity can be inherently worthwhile, that existence itself can be joyful rather than merely purposeful." Veldar's colors shifted through patterns that Maya had learned to recognize as deep contemplation mixed with something approaching longing. "You speak of joy as if it were a natural state of consciousness rather than a temporary distraction from the fundamental meaninglessness of existence. How do you maintain such a perspective when you are aware, as I know you are, of the vast scope of suffering and loss that characterizes the universe?" It was a question that cut to the heart of the philosophical differences that had driven the Galactic Civil War, and Maya took her time formulating a response that might help Veldar understand humanity's approach to existence without dismissing the validity of his own experiences and concerns. "We don't deny the reality of suffering," Maya said finally. "But we've learned that consciousness has the ability to choose what kind of meaning it assigns to its experiences. Suffering can be evidence that existence is fundamentally meaningless, or it can be evidence that consciousness cares deeply enough about its experiences to feel pain when things go wrong. Loss can prove that nothing lasts forever, or it can prove that something was beautiful enough to be worth grieving when it ends." Through their conversation, Maya became aware that other beings throughout the embassy complex were following their exchange through the consciousness networking systems that now connected most of the facility's inhabitants. The questions that troubled Veldar were shared by many former members of the Vethmari power structure, beings who were struggling to rebuild their understanding of existence from fundamental principles. "Perhaps," Maya suggested gently, "you might benefit from direct experience rather than theoretical analysis. There's a group of human children playing in the community recreation area right now. With their parents' permission, you could observe more closely, or even participate if you're interested." The patterns of light that flowed across Veldar's crystalline form indicated surprise that rapidly gave way to something approaching panic. "Participate? I have wielded power over star systems for millions of years. I have commanded fleets that could reshape the fundamental structure of reality. I do not. I have never." The concept of engaging in purposeless activity for the sake of enjoyment is completely foreign to everything I have ever been. Which makes it the perfect place to start learning who you might become, Maya replied, her words carrying the accumulated wisdom of billions of humans who had learned to find joy in the midst of uncertainty and meaning in the face of loss. The hardest part of transformation isn't giving up who you were, Veldar. It's finding the courage to discover who you might be. Over the following hours, Maya watched through the embassy's consciousness network as one of the galaxy's former tyrants tentatively approached a group of human children engaged in building an elaborate sandcastle in the recreation area's playzone. The children, with the adaptability that had become characteristic of humanity's post-contact generation, accepted the towering crystalline being's presence without fear or suspicion, instead treating him as simply another potential playmate whose unique abilities might add interesting possibilities to their construction project. What followed was one of the most remarkable therapeutic breakthroughs Maya had witnessed since first contact began. Veldar, whose consciousness had been shaped by millions of years of calculated decision-making and strategic planning, found himself engaged in an activity that had no purpose beyond the immediate pleasure of creation and collaboration. For the first time in eons, he experienced the simple joy of working with others toward a goal that served no purpose beyond the happiness it brought to those involved. The transformation was not instantaneous or complete, but Maya could sense through their connection that something fundamental had shifted in Veldar's understanding of existence. He was beginning to comprehend that consciousness could find fulfillment in activities that served no strategic purpose, that cooperation could be motivated by pleasure rather than necessity, and that the present moment could contain value independent of any future outcomes it might produce. The sandcastle will be washed away by tomorrow's cleaning cycle, Veldar observed as the children prepared to leave the recreation area, his colors now showing patterns Maya had never seen before, hues that seemed to indicate wonder mixed with a joy so profound it was almost painful to witness. Yes, agreed 6-year-old Emma, one of the human children who had welcomed the ancient being into their play. But it was fun to build, and we can make a new one tomorrow if we want to. Maybe even better than this one. Through the consciousness network, Maya felt Veldar processing this simple statement with the intensity that he had once devoted to analyzing strategic military situations. The concept that something could be valuable even if it was temporary, that the process of creation could be more important than the permanence of what was created, was revolutionizing his understanding of how consciousness could relate to existence. Similar breakthroughs were occurring throughout the galaxy as former members of the Vethmari power structure encountered new ways of being through their interactions with the species they had once sought to control. The rigid hierarchies that had characterized galactic civilization for millions of years were giving way to more fluid forms of organization based on voluntary cooperation and mutual benefit rather than dominance and submission. The old order is dying, Ethros observed as he joined Maya for their evening review of the day's diplomatic developments. Not through conquest or revolution, but through simple obsolescence. Beings are discovering that they prefer cooperation to domination, growth to stagnation, connection to isolation. The Vethmari model of civilization is being abandoned not because it has been defeated but because it has been superseded by something better. Maya nodded, but her attention was focused on developments that extended far beyond the immediate transformation of galactic politics. Through her connection with the expanding network of awakened consciousness, she was becoming aware of changes that operated on scales both vast and intimate, alterations in the fundamental nature of how consciousness related to itself and to the cosmos that surrounded it. It's bigger than politics, Maya realized, her voice carrying the weight of insights that were still forming in her awareness. What we started here is changing the basic nature of consciousness itself. Not just for humans, not just for the Vethmari, but for every form of awareness that encounters our approach to existence. We're proving that consciousness doesn't have to choose between individual autonomy and collective wisdom, between personal growth and social responsibility, between accepting reality and working to transform it. Through the embassy's observation systems, Maya could perceive evidence of these larger transformations occurring throughout the galaxy. Species that had never heard of Earth were spontaneously developing consciousness networking technologies similar to what humanity had pioneered. Civilizations that had been locked in conflicts for millennia were discovering that their disputes could be resolved through expanded empathy and mutual understanding rather than victory and defeat. Even the fundamental laws of physics seemed to be responding to the new forms of consciousness that were emerging, with researchers reporting discoveries that suggested reality itself was more malleable and responsive to conscious intention than anyone had previously imagined. What happens next? Maya asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. What happens next, Ethros replied, his ancient wisdom now enhanced by connection to a network of consciousness that span multiple galaxies, is that we continue growing, continue learning, continue discovering new possibilities for what consciousness can become when it chooses love over fear, connection over isolation, hope over despair. The universe is larger and stranger than any of us imagined, Maya Chen, and we have barely begun to explore the possibilities that await us. As the evening deepened around the embassy complex, Maya looked up at a sky filled with stars that no longer seemed distant and unreachable but, instead felt like neighborhoods waiting to be explored, inhabited by beings who were no longer alien strangers but fellow travelers on the greatest adventure consciousness had ever undertaken. The network of awakened awareness that had begun with her simple offer of water to a dying dragon now connected countless worlds and species in a web of mutual support and shared growth that promised to transform not just galactic civilization but the very nature of existence itself. The 12-year-old girl who had started this transformation by choosing compassion over fear had grown into something more than human but not less than herself, a bridge between what consciousness had been and what it might become. Her story was no longer just her own but belonged to every being who had ever chosen kindness over cruelty, connection over isolation, hope over despair. In the end, Maya realized, the most important lesson was also the simplest one, that consciousness, when it chooses to act with love, possesses the power to transform anything it encounters, including itself. The universe was not a cold, empty void punctuated by brief islands of awareness, but a living system of interconnected consciousness in which every choice, no matter how small, echoed through space and time to create possibilities that had never existed before. As she prepared to return to her quarters for the night, Maya paused to look once more through the embassy's great windows at the bustling activity of beings from across the galaxy working together to build something unprecedented, a civilization based not on power and control but on wisdom and compassion, not on the fear of loss but on the courage to grow, not on the illusion of separation but on the reality of connection that linked every form of consciousness in the endless dance of existence itself. The transformation that had begun with a simple act of kindness would continue for eons to come, spreading through the cosmos like ripples in an infinite pond, touching civilizations yet to be born and forms of consciousness not yet imagined. And, at the heart of it all would remain the fundamental truth that Maya had learned in a forest clearing 6 months ago, that love, when freely given, possesses the power to reshape reality itself. The stars that had once seemed so distant now felt like home, and the future that stretched ahead promised adventures beyond anything humanity had ever dreamed possible. The universe was awakening to its own potential for transformation, and consciousness itself was learning to transcend every limitation it had ever accepted as permanent. Maya Chen, the girl who had saved a dragon with a bottle of water, smiled as she contemplated the infinite possibilities that lay ahead. The greatest story ever told was just beginning, and every conscious being in the cosmos had a part to play in writing its continuing chapters.